everyone, and welcome to the supplements debate. What's real, what's hype, and what you need to know. And we've got a very experienced and knowledgeable group of panelists in for us today. I'm Dr. Tara Naylor, and I'm a food systems expert, author, and coach, and I'll be your host for this panel discussion. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists. Terence Boateng. Terence is a master's trained registered dietitian and certified exercise physiologist. He holds a bachelor's degree in kinesiology from University of Waterloo and completed both a bachelor's and a master's in nutrition at Toronto Metropolitan University. As the owner of Peak Nutrition, Terence provides evidence-based nutrition counseling for athletes, weekend warriors, and busy professionals striving to optimize their health and performance. Next, we have Ashley Leon. Ashley is a Toronto-based registered dietitian and founder of Gazelle Nutrition Lab and Fuel Kit. She is all about helping athletes fuel smarter and perform better with science-backed nutrition strategies. Ashley is a registered dietitian with a Master's of Science degree in nutrition from the University of Toronto and is a certified diabetes educator. Ashley also has a diploma in sports nutrition from the International Olympic Committee. Next, we have Dr. Jonathan Mike, who's a powerhouse in exercise science and sports performance. He has a massive online following and 120 plus speaking engagements at top global events like NSCA and ISSN. He's a leading voice in the industry, and Jonathan's experience spans peer-reviewed research, 12 game-changing book chapters, and consulting for elite brands. His influence reaches worldwide as a sought-after speaker and authority on sports nutrition, strength, and conditioning. Finally, we have Natalie Riviere. Natalie is a seasoned expert in health and nutrition with over 25 years of experience. A registered holistic nutritionist and fitness trainer, Natalie graduated from the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, later owning and operating the school for 18 years. She holds over a dozen fitness certifications and specializes in functional health, including hormone and adrenal health. With her comprehensive knowledge and dynamic teaching style, Natalie empowers others to achieve peak wellness. So there's our amazing panelist. So let's dive into our first question. And the first question is going to Jonathan. Which are the most overhyped supplements on the market today and why? And how do you approach clients who want to take everything that's trending?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for Canfor Pro for having us do this awesome supplement debate. It's really nice to be back again this year. And look forward to bringing value as always. So great question. And typically the question is more of like, what are the most effective supplements is what we typically talk about. But we're going to talk about the ones that are probably the most overhyped. And I want to preface by saying the reason why a lot of supplements get overhyped, and I'm going to give you the 5 most overhyped supplements in my professional assessment, what some of the research says and some coaching educational strategies that fitness professionals and coaches and current trainers can really utilize. There's a reason why supplements get overhyped, and the one really has to do with like the emotionality side, right? A lot of times people really get enhanced emotionality on certain supplements. This could be training methodologies or programming and nutritional components or specific diets out there, and oftentimes the emotionality can drive greater than what the actual science says. So a lot of times not only do people want results, but they do buy hope, not necessarily what the supplement does, like from a physiological or mechanistic perspective. The other one is going to be influence culture, paid promotions, paid advertisements, celebrity endorsements, all that type of stuff. A lot of times the paid endorsements are far greater than what the overall evidence, really says. The third one is going to be more cherry picking studies. And typically anybody can find any study that's pro or con, for or against like their confirmation bias. It's very common. So I want to preface by saying like some of the reasons why supplements get overhyped. And you also have to understand that a lot of these things can be complex science, but it's also misunderstood. People want to, again, use the emotionality without understanding what the supplement does physiologically and what the overall positive outcome is. So that's that. So now I'm going to tell you which supplements in my professional assessment are the most like overhyped. Not in any particular order, but I will start out with actually BCAs, or branched chain amino acids. Now, what I want to say here is the overall hyped claim is going to be, boost muscle growth and, prevent total fatigue, from training. There's a difference between full proteins like whey protein isolate or whey protein hydrolysate, or EAAs, or essential amino acids, versus BCAs alone. So the BCAs, the main ones are going to be leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Of those three, leucine is going to be the most important. And you also have to deal with, the leucine threshold, and that's going to be the most important as it helps continue to drive like protein synthesis. If you look more clearly at position statements from ISSN, or International Society of Sport Nutrition, from their position statement on protein and exercise from 2017, it talks about this a lot more in detail. And so you get the overhyped, clever marketing campaigns and like buzzwords. So there's a difference between, again, consuming the full proteins or essential amino acids, 21 amino acids, versus just focusing on just, isolating certain proteins. So the coaching strategy I would tell everybody is educate clients and athletes on the complete proteins, because the bottom line is that total daily protein intake is more important than just isolating a certain type of amino acids. The second one I would say would be testosterone boosters, typically like Tribulus, or even what's called fenugreek. And the claim is to naturally raise testosterone and, build muscle really fast. Anybody who's really trained for long periods of time, such as myself, would tell you like building muscle fast doesn't really happen. And so again, if you look at most of the science, you'll see like a minimal to no clinical significant effect in healthier subjects. Some of these compounds may increase libido a little bit, but make no mistake, they are not true like anabolic hormones. If they were true anabolic hormones, they would either be illegal or you would have to get them by prescription. And so, in other words, the strategy here is to use critical thinking, understand what the science says in terms of what it says on paper versus what it actually is supposed to do, like physiologically. The third one is going to be fat burners or thermogenic blends. And I may get a little bit of pushback here, or pushback on either one of them, and that's okay. We can handle it. But the claim is for fat burners to, again, like, melting the fat fast and dramatically boosting your metabolism and all this other stuff that you hear. If you look at earlier position statements from Journal of International Society of Sport Nutrition, ISSN, from 2011, but also updated ones, especially when it comes to like energy drinks or energy shots from 2023, you'll see low to moderate increases in terms of like a calorie burning, like maybe somewhere like in the 2 to 5% range. But understand, a lot of these fat burners, aside from having caffeine or caffeine types of compounds, they also have other compounds in there that may pose some type of, ill side effect for individuals. So again, here's where the emotionality kind of comes in with, fat burners, rapid fat burners. So the strategy here is to, again, educate clients and fitness professionals and athletes on like long-term sustainable habits like caloric deficit. If you look at all the books out there, you go to Barnes and Noble or Amazon or, whatever it is, all these books out there, all these diet books, they all have one thing in common, and it's all a caloric deficit, every single one of them. So understanding long-term sustainable habits, strength training 3 or 4 times a week, lifting heavy, particularly with women, caloric deficit, higher protein intakes, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kg per body weight. Even for athletes, you're looking at 1.6 to 2.2, sometimes even more. And understand increasing step count and even NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and understand difference if they like volume of food versus even calories of food. The fourth one is going to be, I kind of laugh at this, and I'm not totally against this one because I like this one, is going to be pre-workout cocktails. Again, I want to make something very clear. In my professional assessment, I like pre-workouts, but the context has to be pretty specific here. And this is what I mean. I want to spend a minute talking about this. The 3 main compounds you're going to find across the board with pre-workouts, and these are going to be either drinks or like powders, are going to be the 3 kings. You're going to have caffeine, creatine, and beta-alanine. Those are almost all found exclusively in any type of pre-workout drink or powder, and most brands across the board. And typically, what you'll find is of those 3, Caffeine is typically going to be somewhere in terms of the biggest ergogenic effect, biggest performance enhancing effect. Again, I refer back to position statements of ISSN is going to be 3 to 6 grams per kg per body weight. However, that can be a lot for a certain amount of people. Okay, you also have like habituation and tolerance and different types of dosages. And so you also have creatine. Most products, most brands you're going to see 5 grams of creatine. Anything less than 5 grams, you will not maximize the benefit. Sometimes you'll see like 3 grams, but the product is very overpriced. And so even with creatine in terms of dosages, and we can talk about creatine could be a 6 hour long talk, in and of itself. But creatine, you have to see 5 grams. Now, beta alanine, of those three, caffeine, creatine, and beta alanine is going to be the one that is going to be the most severely underdosed. And this is the important point I want to make with pre-workouts. Not only aside from brand and what's in the product in terms of other ingredients, you have to educate fitness professionals and coaches and trainers on what is the actual ingredient, and what is the dosage of those ingredients combined together and even like individually. So beta alanine is going to be the one that's going to be the most severely underdosed. Again, referring back to research reviews from ISSN, you're going to see the biggest benefit of beta alanine is 4 to 6 grams. Now, what most people don't know, what I'm going to tell you is that beta alanine physiologically does the exact same thing as creatine. However, the dose, creatine is going to be 5 grams and beta alanine is going to be 4 to 6 grams. So there's a little bit of overlap. However, the timing is going to be a little bit different. You have to take beta alanine for every day, like 28 to 30 days, to start seeing some type of performance increase and allow enough time to increase carnosine concentrations like within the muscle. So that's the main difference. The other difference and why it's severely underdosed is because of a mild side effect, and it's called paresthesia, and that's tingling of the fingers or like on the back of the neck. It's not deadly or anything like that. It's not like a severe side effect, but from a business and product consumer entrepreneurial perspective, you're not going to see anything that's over 4 grams for the most part. You're going to see 2 to 3 grams, because if consumers start taking the product and they start experiencing tingling, they may write bad reviews. Word of mouth may get out, and you'll likely may see a negative impact on product and sales, that perspective. So that's why you see beta alanine in a 2 to 3 grams, despite the fact that the biggest increases in terms of performance is going to be 4 to 6 grams. Okay. And then the last one is going to be detox teas and juices. Again, I'm not totally against someone having various types of teas. There's a lot of benefits to having various, teas in terms of the high potent antioxidant effect and even anthocyanins and many other compounds that are good for the body, skin, liver, that type of stuff. But the intentionality behind it is this is where you see a lot of the celebrity endorsements, the cleanses. I got to flush out all my toxins. I got to sit in a sauna for an hour, rapid fat loss, all this type of silliness. So again, it goes back to long-term sustainable nutritional habits, and really educating people. Again, so what's the intentionality? Again, I'm not against having, teas or, fresh juices like at all, but what is the intentionality behind it, and what are you really doing it for, are the main components of that. So again, to kind of wrap up my statement, really for trainers and coaches, stay updated with the various position statements, try to simplify the supplement science as much as possible for fitness professionals. Teach, again, like research hierarchies, for example, like with the difference of original research versus reviews, or even like meta-analysis, and start kind of building your own like red flag list, right? So again, what are the overhyped supplements versus what are the actual evidence-based supplements that have a true performance benefit?
Thank you, Jonathan. And we're going to cover the red flags later on, I believe. So as time is moving on, we're going to move on to a question for Terence. Terence, which supplements have strong evidence-based support for recovery and performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was a little worried when Dr. Mike was referring to, creatine, because I was like, oh, I'm going to be pushing back against this. But on the performance side, I think there are a few supplements that have very clear benefit. The two that I want to highlight are actually caffeine and creatine. So I'm going to touch on it in a little bit of a separate detail and just give a slight kind of physiological explanation. So caffeine taken in the exact doses that Dr. Mike mentioned, 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight, about an hour before an exercise, has been shown to have roughly 3 key effects. So one, on the stamina side, there's a rating that we use, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, many of the exercise professionals use, called rating of perceived exertion. And it has been shown that taking caffeine in that sort of pre-exercise time at the correct dose can reduce that rating of perceived exertion during endurance performance. Meaning, if people don't feel like they're as tired while they're doing the same activity, they're able to do that activity for longer. So caffeine has been shown to have that benefit. The second is cognitive focus, alertness, decision making, and even reaction time have all been shown to be improved in the right doses of caffeine. And finally, there has been some evidence for increased power output, particularly in repeated sprint performances. So I'm thinking swimming, I'm thinking laps, I'm thinking actual sprint training, all have been shown to be benefited. So to me, caffeine would fall into that sort of gold standard group A sort of supplements. And I'm sort of in agreement with Dr. Mike in terms of even if I'm using a pre-exercise quote unquote for myself, I tend to look at and just take the actual ingredients. So if I want some caffeine, I'll take some caffeine. If I want to build up some beta alanine, I'll take some beta alanine, rather than a lot of the sort of premixes that might not be able to get the dose quite right for my own body size and physiology. So caffeine is one. The second one on the performance side is actually for sure creatine. Very briefly, just to break down how creatine kind of works from a performance point of view. So many of us may know that we have different energy systems, different mechanisms by which our body produces energy, or ATP. There's our aerobic system, which is using oxygen. There's our anaerobic system. And then there's a system called the creatine kinase or creatine phosphate system. So this energy system, this way of producing energy, is used for explosive activities. Jumping up off of a chair, hitting the first couple reps of a bench press, explosive power movements, all use this system. One of the interesting things about this system is it's explosive. However, it has a very short duration because it relies on how much creatine is actually in our muscle. And once we've kind of burned through all of that during an exercise, it needs some time to replenish itself. The basic idea is if we're supplementing with creatine at the right dose, you can expand the capacity of the system and you can expand the recovery rate of that system. So in theory, you can be explosive for longer. And there's plenty of evidence that suggests that it may also improve muscle protein synthesis. The hypothesis being if you're a little bit more powerful, if you're a little bit more explosive, you're getting a little bit more work done in the gym, which can then sort of lead into better results. So on the performance side, those are the two that I tend to center on. There are certainly others, but I wanted to highlight those two.
Great. Does anyone else have any short responses to that one? No? Okay.
I would just add next that the other supplement that often is used by athletes that does have some good evidence is the one that Dr. Mike was talking about. The beta alanine is helpful in short duration activities and that it enhances the buffering capacity. So that anaerobic system that Terrence was talking about that produces energy, it helps elongate that fatiguing period, so that time to fatigue. So athletes are able to perform better if they do take beta alanine for the required period of time and in the required dose that Dr. Mike was talking about.
Excellent. So the next question is a question for Natalie. And the question is, what role does nutrition play compared to supplementation?
Thank you. I love this question. As a nutritionist, of course, I always want to prioritize food, but I'm going to explain why. So when we're an athlete or when we exercise, we have more demands on our body. So our nutrition demands go up because exercise, I'll use a harsh word here, exercise is a form of stress on the body. We'll take away the word stress and call it stimulus just because stress in our society seems like a negative thing. But nonetheless, when we put extra stress or stimulus on the body, we have an increased nutrient demand. Now, we not only have an increased macronutrient demand, so sure, we know, oh, we need more protein, we need more carbs, we might need more fat depending on what our type of activity or sport is. But we also need more micronutrients. Micronutrients are your vitamins and minerals. And typically we don't find these in our sports supplements. So if I'm going to live off protein shakes and protein bars and all of these, there's so many protein foods out there now, probably protein brownies, you name it, we have it. That is not filling in the gaps and making sure that you're getting all of the micronutrients. So all your vitamins and minerals, those are the cofactors that actually make your macronutrients do the job that they're supposed to do. Not only that, there are so many other things in real food, like fiber is huge for our gut health, which is a hot topic these days. So we need to be consuming real food so that we're getting fiber. We also have to think about different compounds in foods that we wouldn't typically find in supplements too, like flavonoids and different immune boosting compounds that we find in our real food. And sometimes it's gotten to the point now where these protein brownies, protein bars, protein shakes, and all the fun things out there, they taste pretty darn good. And so it's really easy to overconsume these things and have an imbalance between our food and our supplements. So there's definitely a place for supplements, because as we train, our nutrient demands go up. So we've got to increase that. And sometimes it's literally impossible to get in the macronutrients and the micronutrients without supplementation. But food is always first, food first. And so it's really important. In the fitness world, we often focus on the quantity. So we know how many calories we need to take in. We know our fat, protein, carbohydrates, and we're hitting those targets day after day after day, which is really great. But we also have to focus on the quality of the food that we're taking in. So the quality of the food is really, really important to ensure that we're getting all of those micronutrients, those immune boosting compounds, those anti-inflammatory compounds. Fiber is super, super important. So food is always first. And in fact, the answer to this question is in the question. So we always ask, can supplements replace food? The word itself, supplement, means to add to. It doesn't mean to replace. So the word supplement it's an add. It's kind of a fill in the gaps. It's kind of your insurance policy to protect you on all those areas that you might have missed. We also know that these days, Dr. Tara Naylor and I were talking about this long before the call, about, unfortunately, the quality of our food has gone down over the past 50, 60 years. And this goes all the way back right to the beginning when we look at farming practices. So our soil is now only remineralized with 3 minerals, and we know there are many more minerals than just 3. We have a lot of artificial fertilizers. Convenience foods are marketed to us, but even if we ate, perfectly organic, really great food all of the time, with the increased demands of exercise, we would still not be getting all the macro and micronutrients that we need. Nonetheless, food first, and then we fill in the gaps and help ourselves out with supplements. And I'm just going to go a little bit further on some of the things that I just said when I gave an example, like protein brownies, protein bars, protein this, protein that. We have to be really careful, because in some of these supplemental foods that we eat, there's actually anti-nutrients in them. So there's things in those products that actually deplete you. So you're exercising, which is a form of depletion. It's using up, all kinds of energy, macronutrients, micronutrients, and then of course you have to repair after the exercise. So your body's sending in all of these tools to help you repair. And if you're eating a bunch of packaged, processed supplemental foods, these things actually contain like anti-nutrients. So they take extra energy from your body to break them down, detoxify them, get rid of them, because there's a lot of chemicals, artificial flavors, colors, preservatives, and all kinds of other things in some of these foods that we tend to grab as convenient supplements to what we're eating, but they're actually putting us into a deficit, because it takes more work for the body to detoxify some of the chemicals and anti-nutrients in those foods than what it's providing. So we have to be really careful about reading labels. I mean, if you eat a tomato, what's in it? Just a tomato. If you have certain supplements, like even Dr. Mike was talking about, some of these pre-workout things, they taste really great. They've got all these things in them. The ingredients could be a really long list, again, of a bunch of things that you don't need in there. I love Terrence's approach of, if I need caffeine, I'm just going to have caffeine. if I need a specific thing, creatine, I'm just going to have creatine rather than some of these complexes that contain, you read the label and there's 17 different ingredients in there and all kinds of flavors and colors and all of that kind of thing. So essentially, our focus should always be food first. We need to be fueling our bodies with good, healthy, good quality food in the right amount to help us not only do the exercise that we want to do, but also to give us the nutrients that we need to recover and rebuild so that tomorrow when we try to do that activity again, we're prepared for it. So food first, and then supplements to fill in the gaps help us reach those targets with the extra demands that we put on our bodies through exercise.
Thank you, Natalie. Since this is such a, well, it's a very passionate question for me, but as do any of the rest of you would want to respond to that one or add some more comments?
Sure, I don't mind jumping in briefly. I think this question also reminded me of, I guess, a hypothesis that we've learned through school, and I've sort of seen in my own practice, called the inverse supplement hypothesis. Basically, how that hypothesis goes is the people who are the least likely to benefit from supplementation are also the most likely to be interested in taking the most supplements. And conversely, the people who have the most to gain tend to be the least interested. And that's simply because somebody who's already eating a healthy diet or is already very health conscious and trying to organize all their meals and trying to meet all their macronutrients and already thinking about this, they are likely, at least in the grand scheme of things, tending to meet, there's far less likelihood that they're micronutrient deficient versus someone who has no bother or no worry about their foods and very well may not be eating enough calcium or not having enough iron or not having enough B12. They would get the most benefit from it. So because of that, yes, I do tend to very much, of course, people who are coming to see me, and I imagine people who are coming to see most of us, are very interested in food and are very curious and wanting to build on those habits. And so that's why I tend to take more of an individualized approach and say, hey, can we get some blood work? Can we see what your goals are? Can we see what some of the symptoms you might be experiencing? And then plugging those gaps rather than sort of blanket, take everything that we've heard is good for us and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, I'll jump in for a second. I mean, Natalie made some good points. I mean, I'm certainly more of an advocate of like food first and having like the base of your pyramid be food, calories. And we can certainly talk about calories, could be a whole other, debate in and of itself. But the issue that I still see with a lot of, and this is more from like a strength athlete, like sports performance, perspective, is eating 2 meals a day and having like 3 or 4 shakes, that type of mentality. And it's still very common. And I'm sorry, like it doesn't get the job done, right? So it goes back to what you guys just said. I mean, yeah, you're getting calories, but you're actually leaving more room for a mineral or micronutrient deficiency, either because calories are just low, because I mean, let's just face it, like you're having 3 shakes a day. I mean, there's not a lot of very little micronutrients in those shakes outside of the actual, whey protein and the other essential amino acids, right? And I can't tell you how many athletes I come across over the years, like they don't eat a lot of vegetables. And I'm like, how do you not eat vegetables? Like, I don't understand this. Like, it's crazy. I mean, earlier on when I was coaching, it's like some of these female athletes would rather eat like 5 or 6 biscuits versus like 3 chicken tenders, So it's something that you always have to kind of contend with. And everybody is there's always a customized, like individual, type of case. And it's an ongoing, it's like, okay, you fix this issue, great. Well, something else comes up. Like it's this always ongoing battle that you typically have to really deal with. And it's not all a bad thing. It's just like, this is what we have to do. And this is the game. So again, it's, being able to put things into context. And I think both Terrence and Natalie mentioned, and I would even say the top 5, I talked about the most overhyped, but the top 5 minerals or micronutrients that almost everyone is depleted in some form or fashion is going to be omega-3 fish oils, vitamin D3 or K2, magnesium, and B12, and what's the other one? Fish oils, vitamin D, magnesium, B12, and zinc. zinc is the next one. So those are the top five that almost everyone is depleted in. If you look at pretty much everybody that lives north of Atlanta in the States is going to be low D, especially the northern states. If you look at other states like in Alaska or other countries like in Finland, where it gets dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, almost everyone is low D. You look at like Middle Eastern countries, that's 115 degrees every single day. Well, they're going to be inside. They're not exactly playing beach volleyball, so they're almost everyone is depleted in those five across the board.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. The next question is for Ashley. Which populations tend to benefit more from supplementation? Could you give us some examples of different populations and their challenges?
Thanks so much, Tara. So I have to say I 100% agree with the other panelists in that I do take a food first approach. So this is what I look at first in my athletes to try and maximize the amount of nutrients that they're getting through their diet for all the reasons that Natalie talked about. There are, however, certain athletes that do benefit from some supplementation, and I like to break them into 4 different groups. And one of them, Dr. Mike has just talked about. So the first group, and I'll talk a little bit more about each, is those who are following a restricted diet for some reason.
I'm jealous.
The second is those in certain geographic locations. The third is those who are under time constraints. And the fourth is for what we've talked about previously, performance enhancement. So in terms of diet restriction, many athletes can fall into this category. So if you're looking at, for example, an athlete trying to make a weight class, they're going into a boxing match, they need to reduce their weight, they're really restricting their diet. I try and ensure that they're maximizing the nutrient density of what they're eating, but often there are gaps in their nutrients, and maybe a multivitamin supplement would be helpful during this time period. And then you have athletes like masters athletes whose appetite may not be what it was when they were 20, and there may be similar gaps in their diet, so they may need to supplement with calcium or some other nutrients. Similarly, for these masters athletes, many of us lose the ability to extract B12 from food and absorb B12 as we age. So many older individuals actually need a B12 supplement. Then there are those groups who restrict if they're, for example, following a vegetarian or a vegan diet, they may need, as Natalie was saying, B12, zinc, calcium, iron is another nutrient they may need to supplement. And finally, in the restricting category, there's certain athletes dealing with different disease states. So for example, if I have an athlete with Crohn's disease who's in flare and they have to really restrict the foods that they're eating, they may have certain nutrients that they're missing out there. The second thing we're talking about is geographic location. So as Dr. Mike was talking about, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere between October and March, you can't make vitamin D from the sun. So vitamin D supplementation is helpful. And also in terms of geographic location, athletes going to altitude, for example. So we're talking runners or cyclists or alpine skiers who are normally living at lower elevation, they're going to higher elevation, and they may need more iron if their baseline iron intake is not good. So they may need iron supplementation. The third group are those athletes who are under time constraints. So here I'm thinking about a young athlete who's in college, whose practice volume is quite high. They also have lots of social engagements. They also have a lot of school. So the supplements we're thinking about here are things that are actually helpful for them, like popping in a protein drink or energy bar into their backpack. Of course, meal prepping and meal planning so they have whole foods is important. But if they're going to be able to meet their recovery needs simply by having something that's really quick to eat, then that might be helpful for them in particular. And then the last group is for performance enhancement. So we're talking here about sodium bicarb, nitrates, creatine, beta-alanine. certain individual elements, as Terrence was talking about, that you may want to add in specifically to meet the specific demands of a specific goals of an athlete. So if they're a sprinter, the beta alanine and sodium bicarb might be helpful. If they're a longer distance runner, nitrates may be helpful. If they're hitting the gym, the creatine might be helpful. So those 4 different groups are the ones that I would recommend supplements for. So mostly to prevent deficiency and to treat deficiency, and then to add in where there seems to be some gaps within the diet.
Does anyone else have a brief response to that one?
I'll jump in there because Ashley brought up a good point, working with, younger people who have a big social life and all of these things. And I love that, is that we have to meet the client where they're at. And a lot of, we talk about meal prepping and all that stuff and how important it is, but we also have to meet people where they're at and get creative and come up with ideas. And so we've all alluded to this when we were talking, is that an individualized approach is really the most important. In my city, there's this company that makes pre-made meals, and they're actually super great. And I keep a few in my freezer. Is it what I eat every day? No, I like to make my own food, mostly because I do like to cook. But there are some weeks when it's just really, really busy. And then that way I know I have these prepared meals already made, ready to go, just in case. And, there are some protein bars and things on the market that are really great. And it's a good idea to have them in your bag. And when you're dealing with different populations, I have a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old. My 15-year-old is a serious athlete. And so, yeah, you have to meet people where they're at. And sometimes, there's a little bit of give and take. And some of these convenience things that are out there and some of the things that we use to fill in the gaps are really useful. So don't get me wrong when I'm saying, like, food first, everything should be organic, this and that, this and that. No, I'm just saying, that's the approach, but then we meet people where they're at. So that was a good point, Ashley.
Thank you, everyone. So the next 2 questions are for the whole panel. So we have, I think, Ashley going first for this one, then Terrence, then Natalie, then Jonathan. So the question is for the whole panel is, how do you evaluate the credibility of supplement brands and their claims? And what information sources do you use to evaluate those claims?
This is an amazing question, Tara, because it's one I get asked all the time, because it's so confusing for people when if they know, for example, they want to take creatine and they go into a supplement store, there's a million bottles there. They all make different claims. It's very hard for them to discern which is a better choice or not. So the number one thing I recommend, there's a lot of different things that I recommend, but I'll let others talk to the other points. But the first step I think people should take is to be sure that their supplement that they're choosing is third-party tested. And so what I mean by this is an outside organization tests the supplement to be sure that it doesn't contain any banned substances. It contains exactly what it says it contains on the label. They have found supplements that had extra cornstarch added in, for example, protein supplements. So it said it contained 25 grams of protein, but it actually only contained 15 grams of protein. So that's a lower risk example, but the higher risk could contain steroids, it could contain heavy metals. They've found supplements with broken glass in them. So you never are 100% guaranteed that the supplement you're choosing is completely pure, but the best way to be more sure of that is to look for the third-party testing certification. And if you're an elite athlete or one that is going to be undergoing anti-doping testing, then you need to specifically look for NSF certified for sport. It's the one that tests for the most substances, and it's the one that's recognized by most sporting organizations. And it actually has a website and an app that you can download, so you can easily take your phone into the store, type in the supplement. Oh, I'm looking at clean creatine. Is that NSF certified for sport? Is a third-party tested? Yes, it is. This is a good one to choose. If you're not an elite athlete, there are other organizations like Informed Choice for Sport, which do a pretty good job. But this would be the number one thing I would look for when you go to choose a supplement, whether it is third-party tested or not.
Oh yeah, major facts right here. Hardcore facts for sure. I mean, third party tested. I get really passionate about this topic. This is why I like talking about it. Um, yeah, major facts for sure. Third party tested. That is by far the number one thing to really look at. Far and above anything else. I would say after you get past the third party tested, you also have like other products too, like outside of supplements, like some of the oatmeals and stuff that now say glyphosate free and those types of things. Again, those types of products, but I know we're talking about supplements. I would say outside of the third party test comes down to brand specific brands, the brand equity, word of mouth, not only taste and flavor, but what are the other ingredients that product really has. Take protein, for example, or some of the pre-workouts that I mentioned earlier. Some brands like Transparent Labs, the more cleaner brands out there, do a really good job of not having a lot of fillers like in their products, like the erythritols, the mannitols, which are like kind of sugar alcohols, which often give people kind of bloatiness or like gas. You find those two fillers in almost every single protein bar out there on the market. And even some drinks, as well. You will often, so taste, and you also get into the natural and artificial flavor ingredients. I am not an advocate at all of artificial flavors. And I'm kind of been personally more of a stickler for like natural flavors and almost I never cross I mean outside of like nutritional individuals, sport nutrition people, I don't think anybody really understands what natural flavors really is. I think the psychological aspects, oh, it's like natural flavor, so it's like a natural flavor. No, that's not really the case. It could be anywhere from maybe 5 to like over 200 ingredients that the consumer has no idea about. You don't really know what you're really consuming at all. So those are a lot of things in those products that I would really watch out for. So in other words, outside of third party tested, what's the brand equity, what's the flavor like, what's the taste, and what the dosage is. Oftentimes the different flavors like the mint chocolate chips and those types of like flavors, you will see if you look on the ingredient list, you will see 1,250 milligrams of like natural flavors, which is well over a gram, versus if you get like say a plain chocolate protein, it may have like 500, right? So you get into the different mixed flavors, and now you start to get into more of the natural artificial stuff to make the product really taste good, because again, if the product doesn't taste good, like no one's really buying it. So brand, third party tested. And again, it comes down to what brand do you like? And I recommend that people, fitness professionals, try different brands. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Some people are married and handcuffed to just, oh, I just want this specific brand. Like this is all I buy. Well, there might be another brand out there that tastes better, has like less ingredients in it. And there are some people out there, and I know that the people on the panel will attest to this. There are some people out there that do have some intolerances, to whey protein, but not casein, right? And those, so there's some companies out there that are like isopure proteins that are like lower carb, little to no fillers. So again, how do you respond? Most people, at least that I come across, don't have intolerances to whey protein, but there are a few people that do. So how do you respond? Like what is the response that your body makes to various types of proteins? Is it the protein in and of itself, or is it what's in the product and like the other ingredients? And this is a process, and this is a journey that people have to take. And I've gone through different brands, and do taste stuff myself. So those are some of the things I would definitely look into.
Okay, thanks. We haven't sort of talked to the second one. I've seen it coming in on the questions about what information sources do we use to evaluate these claims. Maybe Terence or Natalie can talk to that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and I wrote that down as like a discussion point. So absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would agree with third-party testing. I think NSF for Sport is probably the best third-party tester because they do batch testing in the factory and they do testing on the actual storefront. So I think it's an excellent source for athletes. In terms of evaluating claims, I always tend to go back to the focus on the ingredients. And I take a dietitian lens, so I don't really particularly care what a brand says their product does. What I care about is what are the ingredients that they're using and what is the evidence behind those particular ingredients. So you take an ingredient first approach. So if we're taking protein, regardless of what the brand says their protein powder does, if it's just protein powder, well, we know based on the evidence what protein powder can do. I think a very easy resource for sort of just the average general fitness professional, I really like the Australian Institute of Sport. They have it sort of broken down into two categories. So first of all, in terms of the actual supplements, they have Group A, Group B, and Group C. Group A is sort of supplements that have been rigorously tested and have been shown to have a certain outcomes depending on the outcomes you're looking for. So you'll see things like protein powders, energy gels, but also certain micronutrients listed in their Group A. Group B is sort of, I would categorize it as there's some evidence, there may be some benefits, but more research needs to be done. And Group C would fall under the, yeah, this probably isn't going to work out for you. Within each of these, let's focus on the Group A supplements in this Australian Institute for Sport. They have on their website a practitioner sheet. So for somebody who's really wants to get into the weeds and understand the details on dosing, the details on timing, some of their evidence base, you can look at their practitioner kind of fact sheet and read through it, and you'll have a lot of information. If you're more on the consumer side, they also have a sort of consumer fact sheet that kind of gives the highlights. What does it do? How much should you take? When does it potentially not have a benefit? So that's one area I would look at if you just want sort of a broad overview. If you want to get even deeper into the weeds, I am a huge fan of the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition, JISSN. It's always a mouthful for me, because they have a bunch of fascinating position statements. So if you're interested in amalgamation of the evidence on caffeine, well, again, I don't really care what a brand says their caffeine does. I can go to the actual source, to the meta-analysis, and review it. So these journals, ACSM has a lot of position papers. Dietitians of Canada also has position statements. So the idea behind these position statements are we've amalgamated a lot of the research. We've had professionals in our given fields review it. And here's where we think the evidence stands. And here are the dosing. And here is what we don't think. So yeah, again, to wrap it up, at a more consumer or quick reference, Australian Institute for Sport. At a deeper level, position statements, JISSN is probably one of my favorite resources.
And I'm just going to add like an emotional side to it, is that my mom told me this. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And Dr. Mike talked about this before, some of these claims about these fat burners and all of these things, it plays on our emotions and these things that we're dreaming of, and these are our goals. And the same thing with, building muscle rapidly. If you've been trying to build muscle, it's not a rapid process, no matter what you do. So we have to sort of separate our emotion from the claims and also the hype of, some really great person who looks exactly how we want to look or our client wants to look is promoting this product, or someone famous is promoting this product, and you read the reviews, which by the way is very easy to populate with AI. So reviews are not really that credible in the sense that sure, there are some real people reviews, but we have to separate the emotion from it, and also know that labels and colors and wording and everything is just there to work on your emotions. So we always have to separate ourselves from that and go back to the basics, go back to the science, read the label, what's actually in there, and then go back to the science. Like Terrence was saying, I don't care what the label claims it does. I have the science over here that tells me what those ingredients do. So it doesn't matter what the label's saying, because it's going to claim all kinds of things. There is also very tricky things in marketing that we do, and I'm not knocking this company by any means. I'm just going to show you an example. There's a company called Organica. So the last two letters are KA, Organica. I'm not saying the company is good or bad, but when you quickly glance at that, you think, oh, the product's organic. It's not. Just the name of the company is Organica. And so, and again, I could go on for hours about the word natural. There's actually no regulation in Canada for that word. Like there's no distinct description of that. You can put it on anything. So that's why you see it on so many different products, even foods in the store. Natural, what does that even mean? But again, it plays on your emotion. You just automatically think, oh, it must be good. So we always have to step back and separate our emotion and forget about all the fancy claims, the colors, the stars, the beautiful people promoting these things. And it's as simple as seeing what's in that product and understanding from a science perspective what those ingredients actually do.
Thank you, everyone, for those responses. So our last question for the whole panel, and it's going to Natalie first. What are the risks associated with taking supplements, and what are the red flags to watch out for when choosing supplements?
Really great question. And Terrence alluded to this before. He said, you know, sometimes he'll test his clients, and that having data is really, really important. I recently had somebody who overdosed on vitamin D. And yeah, it's true. If you live north of Atlanta from September to May, even if you stand outside naked in the sun, you're not getting vitamin D. It's just not strong enough. So it would make sense to supplement with vitamin D, but I'm using vitamin D as an example, and I don't want to scare people away because yes, there is a good chance that we are low in vitamin D. However, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So it means if we have excess, we're not just going to pee it out. Like B vitamins, you could take a whole bottle. It's not much is going to happen to you. Maybe you get a little flushed and you'll pee it out. It's not the end of the world. But something like vitamin D, you can't have a toxic dose because it's fat soluble, which means we don't flush it out very easily. So having the data on yourself is really, really helpful before you start taking everything that you just read in a magazine is good for you. And something that we tend to do as well is when we read that something's good for us, I don't know why this is, but we have to like swing from one end of the pendulum to the other. Like there's certain things that have come out over the years, you know, I'll just go back to like something like flax seeds, you know, oh, we hear flax seeds are good. Like, you know, in the 1980s, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as flax seeds, never heard about it. And now, you know, we hear about flax seeds, we start dumping it in everything. Well, back up the bus here, slow down. We don't need flax seeds in every single smoothie, shake, yogurt, overnight oats, and every single thing that we eat in a day. It's just too much. And so oftentimes when we hear about something being good for us, we go way over the edge with it. So it's really important to know your individualized needs. And if you don't, seek out a professional to get that help and collect some data on yourself. It's very easy to test your vitamin D, your B12 status, your iron levels, and all of those things before you start supplementing. The other thing that can happen is that if you're taking several supplements that have many different things in them, you could be getting the same thing in all 10 of your supplements. And so that could be, you could end up having too much of a certain thing because there's some, let's just say, I don't know, let's pick a thing. Like, you know, you got 5 milligrams of zinc in this pre-workout. You got zinc in this post-workout thing. You got zinc in your protein bar. You got zinc in your multivitamin. You got zinc in your testosterone booster. And before you know it, you're actually taking in too much zinc. When look at the product independently, it's not a big deal. But when you look at your full stack of stuff that you're taking, you could be overdoing it in a certain area. So it's really important to know what you're taking when you combine it all together. But most importantly, it's to know where you're at and what your needs are at. And I'm a big fan of collecting data on yourself so that you actually know what your needs are as opposed to just, you know, taking whatever you heard was the latest, greatest thing.
Yeah, good points. I think I certainly touched on the red flag stuff like earlier in the very first question. And you can also each person can create their own list of red flags, whether it's supplements or micronutrients or even certain types of foods, for example. I think with the supplements that I mentioned, the big ones, like I'll just say creatine, for example. And obviously, along with Terrence, I'm a huge advocate of, Journal of JISSN, Sport Nutrition Journal. I've done a lot of stuff with that organization. There's really great people there's really no other organization that really does a great job, like just with the supplements and position statements. But creatine, you still get this today. It's really hot outside in August in Texas, and one of my players passed out. Well, they took 5 grams of creatine. It's, now everyone, wants to be arrested and all this other still. It's like, bro, like just stop the madness, for example. The only mild side effect that creatine has is really some GI distress or some diarrhea, but that's only if you take too much at one time. We're talking like maybe 20 to 30 grams at one time. If you do want to take 20 grams, you're better off spreading out the dose equally, like throughout the day. 5 grams morning, afternoon, or at night. But for the most part, 5 grams will is more than sufficient. We mentioned like beta alanine, for example, in terms of increased buffering capacity during high intensity exercise, and some of the offset some of the proton accumulation that accompanies super high intensity movements. In terms of side effects, it's really the exact same as creatine, really, except for the paresthesia, the little tingling. But again, it goes away after an hour. Sodium bicarb, which I know Ashley mentioned earlier, there's actually a lot of really interesting research on sodium bicarb and like research reviews. The thing with sodium bicarb is that it's really, you're not going to find it really in any like energy drinks or even like a lot of like pre-workouts for similar reasons like beta alanine. And it's a funny story because in my first job when I was working with grad students, we actually did a abstract on sodium bicarbonate and like lactate concentrations for like rugby players, and I had to try some of it, and I absolutely will tell you, like you get the bubble guts. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, like sodium bicarb, it's a cleaning agent. So that's why you're not going to find it in a lot of drinks or pre-workouts. One, because of taste. Two, the dosage has to be high in order to get any type of benefit. But again, side effects, get the bubble gut. So again, some of these main supplements are very mild side effect, only if you take either too much, at one time, but you also have to contend with some of the other compounds that, people may not, be aware of and not really know. So again, continue to educate yourselves, get in the weeds, get into the research statements and position statements, and, continue to elevate and innovate.
The only other thing I agree with what Natalie and Dr. Mike were saying, but I would also encourage anyone who's on any medication, if they're taking supplements, to be sure that the supplement doesn't interact with the medication. So for example, if you're on blood thinners, high intakes of vitamin K can counteract the effect of the blood thinners. Calcium can interact with thyroid medications. If you happen to, by any chance, have early stage Parkinson's and you're taking medication, protein powder should be separated from taking the medication. So any medication that you're taking is not inert, and any supplement that you're taking is not inert. Be sure that you're talking to a medical professional when you're taking both, to be sure that there are no interactions, because you want to be sure that your medication is having its full effect, because that really is the most important aspect of your care in that particular instance.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would add very briefly is just recognizing, particularly in Canada, that natural health products are not regulated in the same way as, say, a medication. So just because something shows up in a bottle, it's captured as a capsule, does not mean it has the effects that are necessarily placed on the bottle. So I think the key red flag that I would just add to what everyone has said is overly vague claims like increases energy, increases alertness, just super broad claims that aren't specific enough to be useful for anything, but generally sound good. My main theme, I think, from today is, Jen, just go back to the ingredients, what's actually in it. And just because it's in a pill or a capsule does not mean it's doing what's on the bottle, because the regulations are just very different compared to a medication.
Thank you, everyone, for those responses. Now we have lots of questions in the chat, so we'll move on to the live Q&A. And I have the list of questions. Number one, which supplements are essential, brackets loaded term, obviously, versus which are just beneficial?
I'll jump in quickly, but I'm sure you have something to say, Dr. Mike. Just in general, I wouldn't say that there's specific essential supplements for a blanket statement. I would really encourage everyone to individually look at what they're eating. And as Natalie talked about earlier, adding in specific supplements that are required depending on what your particular diet or your particular performance objectives dictate. So I would not say that there are essential supplements for everyone. We can say vitamin D is probably helpful for most people, but there are people who get enough vitamin D from their diet. So I'd encourage everyone to, at the very least, put their diet through a food diarizer like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer to see where their gaps are, but ideally to seek help from someone who can look at their diet specifically if they want to use a supplement.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's the difference between like health and performance. I mean, are there supplements that everybody really should be taking? In my professional assessment, yeah, and I mentioned the zinc, the magnesium, certain B12s that don't have a bunch of, fillers and stuff in them, fish oils. Yeah, but there's a difference between what do you need health wise, but what do you need performance wise? Because they're not always the same thing, and those are distinct points that people have to understand. We had one in the chat. It says my 6-year-old client's taking asking about creatine supplementation for brain health. Would you cycle creatine? Would you need it to take forever for continued benefits? Okay, so again, it always comes back to creatine. One of my colleagues, Dr. Scott Forbes, does a lot of research. He's at McMaster University up in no, not Saskatchewan. Whatever. It's McMaster University. I know it's in Canada. So he does a lot of research in terms of there's a large wealth of benefits in terms of taking creatine for cognitive purposes, in terms of all the clinical markers shown in terms of immune system markers, and the list goes on. Here's the main difference between older adults taking creatine versus like people like us. Older, and believe it or not, people actually can have a creatine deficiency in the brain. There's a specific enzyme that can make you deficient in creatine. It does cross the blood-brain barrier, but for older adults, 60, 70 plus, they need to be taking 10 grams plus a day. For sure, mainly because they don't either get enough calories, they don't consume, either meat products, but typically the older adults need to be consuming more quantity, 10 grams plus, and you could do like 5 grams in the morning, 5 grams, at night or afternoon, but they typically need to be a little bit more. And you can take creatine, pretty much every day. You don't need to cycle on and off anymore. It's not some anabolic steroid that people still think it is. But you don't actually need to do the traditional loading phase either. You can just start taking it. The traditional loading phase is 5 grams a day for the first 20, 25 days. And then, you just do 5 grams a day, maintenance, but you don't need to do the traditional loading phase anymore. So you can just start taking it. You can take it year round. You can take it, just with water. It doesn't have a taste. You actually want to make sure there's a creatine micronized monohydrate. Certain brands, like earlier on, like the GNC types of brands, were really grainy, and it kind of left a grainy taste in your mouth. But the overall majority of products now, creatine, dissolve very well in water. You can't taste it. You don't need to mix it with some type of glucose agent that people still think you do. You don't need apple juice with it. You don't need orange juice. It does not need a glucose agent or a liquid, whatever that to need. The claim was like, well, it just uploads greater into muscle. It's all BS. So you can just start taking it. Yeah, thank you. Hamilton, McMaster's in Hamilton, Ontario. Thank you very much. Is in the chat. Yeah, it does great research, with creatine. So it is by far the most studied supplement in the history of supplements over the last 30 years. It has well over 1,200 studies.
The next question we have says, what are your thoughts about IV vitamin?
I generally recommend against IV vitamin supplementation unless it's prescribed by a doctor, because every time that you break your skin, you increase your risk of infection. So it's something that if you're in the hospital, for example, we don't take it lightly, giving IV nutrition, and I don't encourage people to get their nutrients in this manner unless, for example, their iron stores are really low and they're having trouble with deficiency and they can't bring up their iron stores and their doctor has prescribed it. So I would only do this if it's physician prescribed or nurse prescribed. That would be my opinion.
Thank you. The next question, It says, I was told to stop calcium supplements, continue glucosamine combo, and take collagen. I have osteoarthritis, especially in my hands. What do you recommend?
I can just briefly touch on this. One of my first jobs coming out of school is I used to work in the nephrology unit at St. Michael's Hospital. And, calcium uptake and calcium metabolism is a very important topic in that area. Obviously, I can't speak to your specific kind of health outcomes because I'm not sure your full medical history. But sometimes medical professionals will tell people to restrict calcium supplementation, for instance, if they're at high risk of calcium oxalate stones or kidney stones that are forming. So that may be a concern that your medical professional may have had. Another concern, depending on your condition, may also be calcification of essentially places that we don't want to calcify. And so in certain conditions, particularly kidney conditions, we can get calcification of different veins and arteries as we're taking in all this calcium, but our body isn't very well equipped to do much with it. So those may be the reasons, but of course I can't speak to yours. Often though, for recommendations around osteoporosis, there's a lot of discussion around vitamin D and vitamin K2. Very briefly, the way we can think about vitamin D is it acts on a series of different organs to help uptake. So vitamin D can help us increase calcium absorption in our gut in particular, and that'll allow us to take in more calcium from the foods that we're consuming. I tend to think of vitamin K2, if I use an analogy, I tend to think of it as air traffic control, okay? So we have a bunch of calcium that's been absorbed. It's now in our blood. What does our body do with that calcium? Well, there's evidence that vitamin K2 kind of points it towards the bones. It says, hey, you go over there. That's your job. So those may be some alternative recommendations, but I would always speak to your health practitioner in particular, because if calcification is happening or if you're forming a lot of stones, then there may also be questions on how much vitamin D you should be taking in those instances.
Thank you. The next question says, opinion on fiber supplements like psyllium husk.
I'll comment on that. Again, I'm going to take a food first approach for fiber rather than isolating fiber and taking it by itself. I'm not against fiber supplements. And again, I would need to know more about the reason for taking the supplement. Is there a lack in the diet, food intolerances, whatever the issue is. But if you're taking in fiber, what you need to remember, number one, and 2 and 3 and 4 is you need a ton of water. Otherwise, fiber can act to do the opposite and actually bind you up if there isn't enough water to actually help flush that through and to work properly in your colon. So I'm not against fiber supplements, although I would go food first because that's its natural way to come into the body with all kinds of other items attached to it versus isolating it that way. But if there's a need to isolate it, just ensure that you're drinking lots of water with it for it to be able to do, for you to achieve your desired outcome with fiber.
Thank you. The next question, and excuse my word pronunciation, is there any real benefits to taking glutathione or glutamine?
Yeah, I can touch on this for a second. I think glutamine, like L-glutamine, which you will find often in, yeah, it is in a lot of protein powders and protein supplements. You can also buy it separately, whether it's a pill form, but you can also get it injectables if you like to go that route, which injectables are typically better because it goes right into the muscle. It doesn't have to go through digestion process. L-glutamine by itself, and there used to be like a really big push for like L-glutamine, and I think ISSN, their sport nutrition statements have done a really good job of. It's not a supplement that I would put like in my top 5, maybe in the top 10, and if it is in the top 10, it's probably maybe like 9 or 10. So it's not something that I would put like, oh, everyone has to take it. Glutathione has shown to be really good for like antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory, skin issues, clearing up the skin, that type of thing. But again, it kind of goes back to what Natalie and Ashley said. I mean, are you taking it because you just want to take it, or are you taking it because you got some blood work panels done from someone that's more of a specialist, and it's found that you're deficient? in those specific, minerals. So again, like it does have certain benefits, but why are you taking it? What's the intention? You taking it because you just want to try it? Okay, cool. Or do you actually have somewhat of a deficient in glutathione? So again, it goes back to what we talked about. Like, is it third party tested? What are the other ingredients, in there, other compounds? So there's a lot to really contend with. And again, this is why we're having, this panel to really educate people as much as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. I have another question. I find this really interesting. How are supplements navigated for gender and age, etc.?
They're really not, to be honest. Like, I mean, so for example, like, are there more supplements and vitamins that are more geared towards women? Sure, absolutely. Are there supplements that are more geared like towards like men, whereas libido or like some of the testosterone stuff, sure, there are. But in terms of what was the last part of that question? Like the weight?
It was about how are supplements navigated for gender or age. So I wonder if they want to know about changing needs as you age, maybe, or changing needs for different
Yeah.
genders.
I'm sure others will jump in here, but most of the supplements are vitamins. I mean, there are vitamins and supplements that you do need in terms of they're better for age. Again, supplements, creatine's one of them. We talked about the fish oil, zinc, magnesium, B12, those types of things. But there are certain supplements or vitamins that, some of the prenatal supplements or vitamins like for pregnant women, those types of more specialty ones that are designed for specific demographics or like populations. I know Ashley touched on that, earlier, like iron, for example, especially with women maybe going through aspects of like, their monthly menstrual cycle, that type of thing. So yeah, there are vitamins and supplements that are geared towards, either men or women or certain specific designations of that. In terms of, and I've gotten this question before in terms of like the protein stuff. I mentioned like grams per kg. And typically it comes from typically it stems from more of the prescription medications that are typically designed for the 70 kg person. The average person is like 155 pounds, 160 pounds. But typically like protein supplements, energy drinks, like they're not going to be, oh, take 2 scoops, for every, 25 kg like body weight or, something like that. They're not really designed, that way. So that's kind of that's a really gray area question, for sure. But there's definitely a lot of supplements and minerals that are specifically designated or geared towards either men or women, or say pregnant women, or osteoporosis, that type of thing. So yeah, there's a lot. There's actually a lot you could really touch on, with that.
But you're making a
Probably,
really good
let's
point.
go.
Oh, sorry. You're making a good point. Like I can only see this much of Dr. Mike, but I can tell he's at least 3 or 4 times the size of as I am. So, are our needs the same? No. So it's really, and again, I'll go back to the iron example. If someone has Crohn's or colitis, let's say they're female, so they have a menstrual cycle, but they're also losing blood, possibly because of they have a flare in Crohn's or colitis and they're bleeding in their bowels. So their iron needs are more. So it's a very individualized thing. And I don't think it's so much so age, because you can have a 15-year-old who's 6'4", I have one, or a 15-year-old who's 5'2". And so the demands tend to be based on more size versus gender. And obviously your needs based on your lifestyle, your health history, your deficiencies, and so on. So not so much gender, but more so based on size.
Okay. I think we've already answered the one about creatine and young people. So we'll do the next one, which says, who should we look for as a third-party tester?
The best organization, as I was talking about before, it's called NSF, certified for sport. So N is in Nancy, S is in Sam, F is in Frank, certified for sport. So they do have an app that you can download and find the supplements that are third-party tested with this. This is the best one to choose. There are other organizations, but this is what I would recommend.
Okay. How do you know what your needs are? Is there a test you can take?
I can jump in on that answer. I would give a couple of answers to that question. So there are what we call your RDAs, or your recommended dietary allowances. These are sort of amalgamations of studies that try and figure out how much of each particular vitamin or mineral you need based on large age demographics and generally based on your sex as well. So often with some of these apps, Chronometer, MyFitnessPal, etc., you can actually put in a few days of your kind of general eating pattern. And if you put in sort of your age, your height, weight, and sex, it'll kind of tell you, here's what you're eating, here are all the micronutrients, and here are the general recommended dietary allowances. The one caveat I would give is these RDAs are intentionally meant to overpredict. So they're meant to meet 98% of the population. So if, for instance, the RDA for zinc is 15 milligrams, I believe off the top of my head, and you're eating 14 milligrams, does that mean you're deficient in zinc? No, not necessarily, because that 15 milligrams is over predicting to meet 98%, meaning most people actually need a little bit less than that, as a random example. So that's one tool you can use. If you want to get a more sort of under the skin look, then ultimately it would be blood work that would determine if you're actually particularly deficient in a particular nutrient. Depending on where you are, depending on your doctor, depending on if you have sort of private healthcare or public healthcare up here, it can be difficult to get every single micronutrient analyzed, but a lot of the general ones will be like B12, iron, vitamin D, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, just as a note, it's 2:34. We do have more questions. We are going to answer them, but we'll try and get them done quickly. But we are one of the last sessions of the day, so we'll try and get these questions answered. One more question. Okay, what supplements do you recommend for improving cognitive abilities of menopausal women?
I can touch on that more so on the cognitive part, probably a little bit less on the menopausal women. I'll reserve that for, some of the Natalie, Ashley. Typically for the cognitive portion, say overwhelmingly creatine for sure, particularly with older adults. I spoke on this earlier. There's also other compounds like huperzine A, for example. Alpha GPC is another. These are under the umbrella we're called like nootropics or cognitive, enhancers, and cognitive brain enhancers for more focus, memory. So those are some of the main alpha GPC, huperzine A. There's a few other ones that are very common that are not coming to mind, right this second. But creatine is certainly one of them. You can buy. Get creatine, we've talked about creatine all day long, alpha GPC. You'll find that also in a lot of pre-workouts and even some energy drinks, as well. Sometimes, again, depends on the dose, but nootropics is an area of topic that is very, very fascinating. And I've mentioned that a little bit in some previous talks. I think one last year for CanFit Pro and even some other, talks that I've given. That actually could be a really good topic, in the future is nootropics because ashwagandha actually is, I would probably consider that a mild nootropic. It's more like it kind of acts as a natural. Most people have heard of Xanax, which can be very addictive, but ashwagandha actually acts as more like a natural anti-anxiety, anti-stress, supplement. I actually take that. I take it on my travel days, just so I can kind of stay calm. And it works very well. So ashwagandha is probably a mild one, but again, alpha GPC, creatine, huperzine A, berberine, is another one. I can't remember if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But those are the ones that the cognitive in terms of the menopausal. That's certainly not my area of expertise.
Okay, the next question is, this is funny how the next one comes up, is the person says, someone I know started taking ashwagandha, vitamin D, turmeric, and magnesium supplements. Is it good to take long term, and what are the outcomes, if any?
I don't really see any negative outcomes from vitamin D or like turmeric. I mean, turmeric typically is more of a kind of a polyphenol compound that you'll see from like curcumin. You can buy those for repro brands at Costco and other nutrient sport nutrition stores. Has a lot of benefits in terms of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties. For sure, you can buy it also used as a spice, curcumin. For cooking purposes. I think it's great. I don't really see any negative effects long term with turmeric, curcumin. Again, it goes back to what we talked about with dose for sure. I mean, if you're taking a bunch of it at one time, like you may get some GI distress. But the vitamin D, I think the minimum dose, especially if you're deficient, the minimum dose. I know the RDA for vitamin D is like 600, which doesn't even budge at all like your blood levels. It doesn't even move it like 2 centimeters in a sense. So you can buy stuff 5,000 IUs. You can get those various brands at Costco, but typically over 5,000 IUs, you have to get a doctor prescription. I know a family member of mine was really deficient in vitamin D. And we've been living here like in Phoenix for like 6 years, and it's super hot in the summer, and like they were low D. So what do they had to do? They had to get a shot of 40,000 IUs vitamin D. And I still hear the stories like, oh my God, I felt amazing. Everything was like super clear and clarity. Well, yeah, I mean, you have to front load it, and then you go back to the regular maintenance of, D3, K2 combo. So yeah, I don't really see any negative side effects with those. Ashwagandha, again, I only take it like on my travel days, but it's not something I take like every single day. I don't remember off the hand the dose, but it's not. I don't remember offhand the dose, but it's typically maybe 500, 600 milligrams, maybe a little bit more, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. So thank you, Terence, Ashley, Jonathan, Natalie. That was a really amazing session, and thank you for all your questions and your answers. And thank you to everyone who asks wonderful questions. Thank you to CanFit Pro for putting this session on, and thank you for everyone who attended.